Hello viewers, today I bring you a story titled, The Crown That Crumbled. Please subscribe, like, drop a comment and share the link with friends. In the scorching heat of an African elite neighborhood, Caroline Temu reigned supreme. Born to a wealthy family, she was the epitome of extravagance, a queen of the social scene. Her father, a prominent businessman, and her mother, a celebrated socialite, had spoiled her rotten. Caroline grew up with a sense of entitlement, believing the world revolved around her. But to truly understand the kingdom she ruled, one had to see the neighborhood itself. Palm trees imported from Mauritius lined the streets. The houses were mansions large enough to get lost in. Children rode electric scooters worth more than the average worker's salary. The air even smelled different, like the mixture of designer perfume and freshly watered lawns. And at the center of it all stood the Temu estate. A small continent disguised as a house. The gates alone were rumored to cost enough to build a clinic. The gardeners trimmed the hedges with such precision that even the birds refused to land on them out of respect. Inside this palace lived Caroline Temu, who walked through life as though walking down a runway. At 25, Caroline was a stunning beauty, with striking features and a sharp tongue. She was the eldest of 3 siblings. She had a flair for drama, often creating scenes to draw attention to herself. Her friends and family walked on eggshells around her, lest they trigger her infamous temper. "I'm Caroline Temu, and I'm fabulous," she would declare, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Everyone wants to be me, darling." She said it so often that the Temu household staff began using it as a greeting. "Good morning." "No, darling. Fabulous morning." Caroline loved it. Her days were filled with spa appointments, brunches, shopping sprees, and a weekly ritual she called Queen Routines, a 3-hour process involving facials, massages, hair steaming, and yelling at someone. Anyone. It didn't matter who. She had a small circle of friends, or rather, fans who followed her like satellites. They laughed at her jokes, complimented her outfits, and always agreed with her, even when she was catastrophically wrong. But they weren't blind. They knew Caroline was exhausting the way a hurricane is exhausting, beautiful from a distance, terrifying up close. Still, no one dared cross her. Not until the day her life took its first unexpected turn. One day, while sipping champagne at a lavish party, Caroline's parents dropped a bombshell. "Caroline, we've decided it's time for you to grow up," her father said, his voice firm. "We're appointing you to oversee the family's charitable foundation." Caroline's eyes sparkled. "You mean, like, actually work?" Her mother nodded. "Yes, dear. It's time you used your privilege for good." Caroline scoffed. "Good. Huh. I don't do good. I do great." But her parents were resolute. Caroline would work with the foundation, whether she liked it or not. Her friends gasped as though they'd witnessed a public execution. Caroline working? Impossible. Unthinkable. Catastrophic. But her parents were unmoved. Unknown to Caroline, they had met with psychologists, advisors, pastors, and even one prophet who claimed that Caroline needed a baptism of responsibility. So the decision was final. The next day, Caroline arrived at the foundation's office, her red bottom heels announcing her arrival. She was greeted by Thandi, a bright young woman with a warm smile. "Welcome, Caroline. We're so glad to have you on board," Thandi said. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "On board? I'm the boss, darling. Get me coffee." Thandi's smile faded, but she nodded and escaped off to fetch Caroline a latte. Everyone in the office watched with a mix of terror and curiosity. Who talks to Thandi like that? Not even the director. Thandi was loved, respected, practically the sunshine of the entire organization. Caroline, of course, noticed none of that. She plopped herself into the director's chair, pulled out her phone, and immediately did a selfie session. The caption read, "Day 1 as a CEO. Saving the world, one latte at a time." When she finally started working, she did so the way one enters a gym for the first time, confused, uninterested, and annoyed at every instruction. She sat through meetings with glazed eyes, whispered insults about people's outfits, and spent half the day researching handbags. The staff exchanged tired glances. This was going to be a long year. But life had a strange way of pairing opposites. And Caroline's opposite was Thandi. Where Caroline was sharp-tongued, Thandi was gentle. Where Caroline was dramatic, Thandi was calm. Where Caroline was extravagant, Thandi was simple. Thandi lived in a modest apartment, took the bus to work, and supported her sick mother and 2 younger siblings through a small salary. Despite this, she was a beacon of hope, the type of person who believed in people even when they didn't believe in themselves. Caroline treated her terribly at first. She barked orders as if Thandi were some malfunctioning robot, rolled her eyes whenever she spoke, and dismissed every piece of guidance with a flick of her perfectly manicured fingers. To Caroline, humility was an outfit she refused to wear, and Thandi was merely an unfortunate shadow assigned to follow her around. But Thandi never raised her voice. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She saw the human inside the hurricane. Where others saw a spoiled brat beyond redemption, Thandi noticed brief flashes, small, almost invisible moments, when Caroline's cruelty looked more like fear wearing high heels. A hesitation before she insulted someone. A wavering in her eyes when faced with true suffering. Thandi didn't excuse her, she simply understood that brokenness often hides behind gold-plated arrogance. As Caroline began her work, she was confronted with the harsh realities of poverty and inequality. The world she had carefully avoided now pressed itself against her like an unwelcome mirror. She met children who went to bed hungry, their ribs drawing maps of desperation under their shirts, women who were victims of domestic abuse, whispering their stories as if speaking too loudly might summon their pain again, and families who struggled to access basic healthcare, walking miles under the scorching sun just to reach a clinic that had more patients than medicine. The ugliness of life horrified her. It didn't fit her curated feed or her designer worldview. Why can't they just get jobs? Caroline would complain to Thandi. Why do they have so many kids? Her tone dripped with entitlement, as though poverty were some fashion choice people made to inconvenience her. Thandi would patiently explain, but Caroline wasn't listening. She was too busy taking selfies and updating her social media, desperate to appear philanthropic while refusing to touch anything that looked remotely human. She could not stand the sight of less privileged people and called them cursed. Her perfume always seemed to battle the air around her, sweet luxury pushed against the heavy scent of struggle. And whenever a child ran up to her, excited or hopeful, Caroline stepped back as if they were contagious. Still, despite Caroline's arrogance, Thandi continued guiding her. Slowly. Gently. Painfully. Every day felt like dragging a diamond-encrusted boulder uphill. But Thandi believed in a kind of transformation that didn't happen with lectures, it happened with exposure. With witnessing. With moments that forced one to feel something real. And little by little, though Caroline would never admit it, something in her began to crack, not break, but crack. Just enough for the truth to start seeping in. Each community visit chipped away at Caroline's ignorance. Little by little, she started noticing things she had previously ignored: the fatigue in mothers' eyes, the fear in abused women's voices, the joy of children who had nothing yet laughed like they had everything. And slowly, the hurricane softened. But as the days went by, something strange happened. Caroline started to care. At first, it was barely noticeable, more of a tremor than a shift. She paused longer when listening to people's stories. She asked fewer dismissive questions. She stopped holding her breath every time she walked into a crowded community center. Something inside her, something she had buried under privilege, glitter, and ego, began to stir. She began to see the world through Thandi's eyes, to understand the struggles and triumphs of the people she met. Not as blurry background characters in her perfect life, but as individuals with names, histories, and hearts that beat with both hope and pain. She saw the pride of mothers who had nothing yet offered her food from the little they had, the determination of young boys who walked miles to school despite torn shoes, the laughter of girls braiding each other's hair under a broken tree that served as both a playground and a sanctuary. For the first time, these people weren't cursed, in her mind. They were surviving unimaginable circumstances with more dignity than she had ever shown with all her wealth. One day, while visiting a rural village, Caroline broke down in tears. It happened unexpectedly. A young girl, no older than 7, handed her a wilted flower and said, "Thank you for coming." Her smile was small but sincere, her eyes carrying stories no child should know. Something inside Caroline shattered, quietly, but completely. The weight of her past arrogance, her ignorance, her cruelty pressed on her chest like a confession waiting to be spoken. "Thandi, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I had no idea." Her tears didn't fall neatly, they came violently, as if she were mourning the person she used to be. The villagers paused, watching this woman who had walked in with sunglasses and superiority now crumbling in the dust like any other human. Thandi put a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Caroline. You're here now. You can make a difference." And Thandi meant it. She saw the sincerity in Caroline's breakdown, not as a moment of weakness, but as the first true sign that she was finally seeing, finally feeling, finally becoming someone capable of compassion. This moment changed something fundamental in Caroline. A crack in her soul widened into an opening, and through it poured empathy, recognition, and a kind of humility she had never known. She realized, with a painful but liberating clarity, that the world was not built to orbit her desires. That real strength had nothing to do with money, influence, or filters, but everything to do with showing up for others. For the first time in her life, she felt human. Not perfect. Not flawless. Not adored. Human, raw, vulnerable, capable of both breaking and healing. And, for reasons she couldn't explain at the time, it felt like freedom. But Caroline's transformation was far from complete. Growth, as Thandi often reminded her, was not a straight line, it was a tug-of-war between who you used to be and who you were trying to become. And Caroline, though softened by her experiences, still carried a lifetime of entitlement in her bones. So when her parents announced their plans to retire and hand over the family business to her, Caroline was ecstatic. The old Caroline, the one who thrived on applause, control, and the taste of victory, rose to the surface like a glittering ghost. Suddenly, compassion seemed secondary, humility optional, and the world felt right again because it was tilting back toward her. Finally, I'll be the one in control, she crowed to Thandi. I'll show them all what I'm capable of. She said it with her chin lifted high, her eyes glowing with the kind of ambition that didn't care who it stepped on. Caroline didn't see leadership as responsibility, she saw it as revenge. Thandi's expression was skeptical. Are you sure that's what you want, Caroline? She asked it gently, aware of the storm brewing beneath Caroline's renewed arrogance. But Caroline wasn't listening, she was too busy celebrating her impending triumph. She dreamed again of influence, power, and status. The very things she had begun to let go of came rushing back like old friends, pulling her into their familiar embrace. She could already picture herself on magazine covers, delivering speeches, making headlines, not for charity or humility, but for dominance. Old habits stirred within her. They seeped back quietly, the entitlement, the pride, the belief that the world owed her something for simply being her. She started snapping at people again. She ignored Thandi's advice. She dismissed the villagers' concerns, viewing them once more as background noise instead of lives. And then reality hit. The family feud that followed was brutal. Caroline's siblings, who had long been overshadowed by her antics, contested her appointment. Resentment that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. Old arguments resurfaced, childhood wounds, neglected relationships, the privileges she received while they were expected to be responsible. Before long, the media got involved, and the drama played out in the public eye. Social media exploded with commentary. Headlines questioned her competence, her character, her readiness. Talk shows speculated gleefully. Strangers debated her worth, her past scandals, even her transformation, if it ever truly existed. Caroline was devastated. How could they do this to her? Didn't they know she was the best person for the job? She felt betrayed, misunderstood, victimized. Everything she thought she had learned began slipping through her fingers as anger clouded her clarity. You're just jealous, she screamed at her siblings. You always have been. The words tore out of her like a wounded animal, raw and uncontrolled. Her siblings stared back, not with jealousy, but with exhaustion. And somewhere in the corner of the room, Thandi watched quietly, her heart aching because she could see what Caroline couldn't. This wasn't the world turning against her. This was Caroline confronting herself. But fate had a larger blow waiting. Here's the updated version. The collapse of her father's empire was like a tsunami, sweeping away everything Caroline thought was solid. Investigations, arrests, and scandals became the headlines that haunted her every waking moment. The wealth that had once flowed like water vaporized overnight, leaving her dry, barren, and penniless. For the first time, Caroline understood the true meaning of humility. She, who had once commanded an army of servants and sycophants, was now forced to confront the harsh reality of her actions. The consequences of her family's corruption and greed had finally caught up with her, and she was powerless to stop it. Thandi, the young woman she had once bossed around, was now her lifeline. Thandi found her a small, dingy apartment in a rough neighborhood and helped her get a job at a local charity. Caroline was assigned to work with vulnerable children, many of whom had suffered the same fate she had once dismissed. As she worked tirelessly, trying to make amends for her past mistakes, Caroline began to see the world through different eyes. She learned to take taxis, to budget, to apologize. She learned to listen, to empathize, and to care. Her new life was nothing like the old one. No maids catered to her every whim, no luxury cars whisked her away, no designer labels adorned her body. Thandi watched her grow, proud of the transformation, but also cautious. Life was teaching Caroline what wealth never had: humility, compassion, and gratitude. But just as Caroline was starting to find her footing, Tandy's absence was like a cruel blow. She was diagnosed with a preventable illness, one that had taken her life too soon. The poverty that Caroline had once dismissed had claimed another victim, and this time, it was someone she loved. Caroline was shattered. A grief like she had never known consumed her, a loss she couldn't undo. Thandi, the one person who had seen potential in her, was gone. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of regret, unable to breathe, unable to move. As she sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by the memories of her former glory, Caroline wept. "I'm sorry, Thandi," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." This time, the apology wasn't a performance, a calculated move to garner sympathy or attention. It was real, heavy, and transformative. It was the beginning of a long, painful journey towards redemption. In the midst of her sorrow, Caroline knew she had to make amends with her siblings. She had hurt them deeply, and it was time to make things right. She reached out to them, apologizing for her past behavior, and asking for forgiveness. To her surprise, they welcomed her back with open arms. As they rebuilt their relationships, Caroline became a changed person. She was no longer the self-centered, entitled woman she once was. She was kind, compassionate, and caring. She became a role model to her siblings' children, teaching them the value of hard work, empathy, and kindness. Caroline's journey was far from easy. There were still days when she struggled to make ends meet, when the memories of her former life haunted her. But she persevered, using her experiences to help others. She continued to work at the charity, advocating for the rights of vulnerable children and families. As the years passed, Caroline rebuilt her life, one step at a time. She found a new sense of purpose, a new sense of identity. She was no longer Caroline Temu, the wealthy socialite. She was Caroline Temu, a woman of substance, a woman who had found her voice. The fall of Caroline Temu was final. Her empire had crumbled, her wealth was gone, and the people she loved had abandoned her. But somewhere deep within her, a seed remained, planted by Tandy's kindness and generosity. A seed that would grow into something better than fabulous, a woman with purpose and wisdom. And as she looked back on her journey, Caroline knew that she was grateful for the fall. It had taught her the true meaning of humility, compassion, and gratitude. It had given her a new lease on life, a new chance to make a difference. The end. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe, like and comment. Look out for another story.